The first hit came out of empty space, and it burned. Overlord Zorath felt the flagship shudder before the alarms even caught up to it. Across the bridge, control screens flickered green to red, and one word bled onto the main display before the system killed it. Ember. It meant nothing to him. He had never heard the term before tonight, and something about that bothered him more than the impact itself. 3 amber eyes swept the chamber. Crew members Obsidian Carapist, Bronze-Ridged, bred for war, scrambled at stations that had never failed before. A junior weapons officer named Threx slapped at his console, trying to raise shields that wouldn't answer. Zorath's crest flared, a warning sign his soldiers had learned to fear more than any enemy weapon. He had conquered many systems. He had watched species kneel before him, necks bent, weapons surrendered. The kneeling doctrine had never failed. Not once. Not until tonight. "Report," he said, and his voice ground out like stone dragged over stone. No one answered fast enough. A second impact came moments later, closer to the reactor core this time, and the deck tilted hard enough that Threx slid across the floor and did not get back up. Another officer knelt beside him, checked for breath, and found none. She looked up at Zorath, waiting for an order that would make sense of what was happening. He had none to give her. Zorath gripped the command rail with 4 clawed fingers. Behind him, on the auxiliary display, a recording drone continued to run, feeding footage back to every open channel in Draxari space, his own broadcast, meant to show the galaxy his triumph over the humans of New Horizon. Instead, it was recording something else entirely. Something he could not yet name. He looked for the source of the strike and found nothing. No fleet on the sensors. No warning beacon, just a silence with teeth in it, and a flash of white that had come from a patch of space his instruments swore was empty. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Overlord Zorath did not know what was happening to him. He would not live long enough to find out why the mine had waited so long to fire. You're about to. Hours earlier, the Dominion chamber had not been lit like this in longer than anyone alive could remember. Tonight, every seat burned with cold white light, and delegates from across known space sat in judgment of a single human colony that refused to bend its knee. Zorath stood at the primary dais, unhurried, his bronze ridges catching the light. Behind him hung the tally board, already glowing with the vote, a wide majority in favor of destruction, a stubborn minority opposed. The chamber smelled of ozone and the sour metal tang of 200 delegate species sweating through their fear, all of it aimed at one small colony called New Horizon. The humans were offered the kneeling, Zorath said, and his voice carried without needing to be raised. They refused. Tomorrow, at dawn, New Horizon burns to bedrock. No cheer went up. No one in the compact cheered anymore. They had simply learned, over centuries, that objecting cost more than it saved. A Reth delegate in the 3rd row lowered his head crest. The closest his species came to a wince. Beside him, a Voss representative, pale, many-limbed, draped in ceremonial chain, kept both forward eyes on Zorath and both rear eyes on the exits, an old habit from a species that had learned the hard way when a vote turned into a purge. In the 14th row, Ambassador Wei sat with her hands folded in her lap and said nothing at all. She had said nothing through the entire session. A Reth delegate 2 seats down kept glancing at her, waiting for the human envoy to protest, to beg, to do anything. She never did. Her stillness was starting to feel less like defeat and more like a held breath. Zorath didn't notice. He had never needed to notice humans before. "Let the record show," he continued, "that the kneeling doctrine has held for longer than any government in this chamber has existed. It will hold tomorrow. It will hold when New Horizon is bedrock and glass." He let his gaze pass over the rows, amber and unblinking. Species who resist do not become legends. They become warnings. Ask the Threll. Ask the Council of Ulvash. Ask anyone who tried to be the exception. A murmur ran through the chamber, low and compliant. It was the sound of a room agreeing because disagreement had a cost none of them wanted to pay. Wei's aide, a younger man seated just behind her, leaned close and whispered something. She did not turn her head. She only closed her hand, once, around a data slate in her lap and opened it again. The vote closed. The tally board locked its numbers. Zorath did not look at them twice. He had already moved on to logistics, deployment windows, fleet formations, the small satisfactions of a war that wasn't a war so much as an execution with paperwork. On the far side of the compact's reach aboard the human command station called the Bastion, Admiral Devon Cross, set down a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago and did not pick it back up. The alert had come through in the dead hours of the station's overnight cycle. He read it twice, not because he doubted it, but because some part of him had been waiting years for exactly this kind of message, and he wanted to be sure it was finally real. His face had been called a cliff that had seen too many storms, and tonight it looked the part. He had spent most of his adult life in the fleet, and a long stretch of it carrying the weight of Ceres, where he had lost his wife and daughter to a war nobody back home had wanted to admit was already happening. On the corner of his desk sat a tarnished silver locket, its surface scratched from countless hours in his palm. He did not open it now. There wasn't time. Commander Thorne's face appeared on the comm screen, one prosthetic eye catching the light oddly. A photograph of a young girl was tucked into the edge of his jacket collar, half visible, the way it always was. Confirmed fleet at New Horizon, heavy dreadnought escort, full ground complement. They're not bluffing this time, sir. Cross's left hand trembled, just slightly, the way it always did before something he couldn't afford to feel yet. He pressed it flat against the desk until it stopped. "Wake the Ember Protocol," he said. "Full mobilization. Contact every name on the Concord list." Thorne didn't ask what that meant. He'd been waiting almost as long as Cross had. "And Thorne," Cross added, "get me Holloway and Desai. Now, not after coffee." Desai's already got Coffee's angrier cousin in a mug that insults people. Thorne said, "She'll be there." Lieutenant Desai arrived on the bridge, still holding a chipped ceramic mug that read World's Okayest Space Explorer, tea sloshing dangerously close to the rim. She set it down hard enough that some of it spilled, and nobody said anything about it, because everyone had bigger things to look at. "Sir," she said, "the Ember Protocol file just unlocked itself. It's been sitting there for years. Updated twice a year. Every year. Rehearsed more times than I can count on both hands and still have fingers left." She looked up from the display. "Never used. It's about to be," Cross said. Captain Holloway leaned over the tactical table, already sketching formations with 2 fingers across the glass, thinking in shapes the way he always did before a fight. His leather jacket had gone soft and pale at the elbows from years of exactly this posture. "If Thorne's numbers are right, we're heavily outnumbered before we even leave dock." "We're not fighting the numbers," Cross said. "We're fighting the doctrine." He finally reached for the locket, opened it without looking, the way a man checks that his own pulse is still there. The photograph inside hadn't changed in 11 years. A woman and a child on a beach. Sunlight, nothing else. He had looked at it so many times he no longer needed his eyes for it. He closed it, set it down, and turned back to the display, where the tally board from the Dominion chamber was still broadcasting for anyone willing to watch it. "Get me the Concord list," Cross said. "Every ship. Every name that's been waiting." Desai's fingers moved fast across her console. "Pulling it now. First contact confirmed, the Norel Skiff clan. They say they've been ready since the day their homeworld knelt." A pause, another line lighting green. "Second, the Ashcare Remnant Fleet. Small, but they don't hesitate." Third, she kept reading names as they came in, and each one landed on the bridge like a stone dropped into still water. Species who had been told to kneel, species who had watched their own skies change color the day they refused, and then knelt anyway, because refusal without help was just a slower kind of dying. They had waited. Now something on this station had finally said the word they'd been waiting to hear. Holloway watched the names accumulate on the display and let out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh. "Thorne, you seeing this?" "I'm seeing it," Thorne said, one hand resting near the photograph in his collar, without seeming to notice he'd touched it. "I'm seeing a lot of people who've got their own reasons to be here." Cross didn't answer right away. He was looking past the display, toward the section of the starfield where a gas giant sat quiet and enormous, exactly where it had always been, exactly where nobody watching from the Dominion side had ever thought to look. "They think silence means we agreed with them," he said. 39 years of silence, and they think it was surrender. "Wasn't it supposed to look that way?" Desai asked. "It was supposed to look like anything except what it actually was," Cross said. Somewhere past the edge of the system, in the dark behind the gas giant, ships that didn't officially exist began, quietly, to move. The Neural Skiff clan came first, low and fast, hulls the color of wet slate, built for a species that measured trust the way humans measured currency, carefully, and never twice with the same coin. Their captain, a broad-shouldered figure named Yiru, opened a private channel to the bastion the moment her ship cleared the rendezvous point. "You called," Yiru said. "No greeting, her species didn't use them. We came. Understand that we are not here for you, Admiral. We are here because the Doctrine took something from us that it will never give back, and today it finally meets a bill it cannot pay." "Understood," Cross said. "Then we want the same thing. For today," Yeru said. "That will do." Behind her, more hulls resolved out of the dark, the Ashkur remnant fleet, small and scarred, ships patched together from 3 different wars they hadn't started. Then the slower, heavier profiles of a species who spoke rarely and fought without warning, their hulls unmarked because they had learned that pride painted on a ship was the first thing an enemy aimed for. Desai read off each arrival like a roll call nobody had taken in years. 6 species. A fleet that would have looked to any outside observer like a scattering of survivors rather than an army. That was Cross thought, watching the tactical display fill in one quiet arrival at a time, exactly what they were. Survivors who had run out of patience on the same day by coincidence or something that looked enough like fate not to argue with. They're not battle-tested against the Draxari directly, Holloway said low, mostly to himself. Most of these ships have never fired on a Dominion hull in their lives. They don't need to win the fight, Cross said. They need to witness it. There's a difference, and Zorath's never had to learn it. Thorn's photograph shifted against his collar as he leaned forward to check a final course correction. He didn't push it back into place. Some part of him seemed to want it where he could feel it. "Insertion window opens in 6 hours, he said. "Behind the giant, same as we've drilled 47 times. If their scanners are as blind on this vector as we've always bet they'd be, they will be," Cross said. "That's the whole doctrine." Arrogance doesn't check twice. He looked down at the locket one more time before closing his hand around it and slipping it into his coat pocket, where it would stay for the rest of the night. Not open, not yet, just close enough to feel. 6 hours, he said. He stood on the bridge as the gas giant's curve filled half the viewport, its storms turning slow and silent below them. Let's not waste them. 6 hours became 4, became 1, and Admiral Cross spent none of them sleeping, and watched the countdown tick toward the insertion window his people had drilled toward for so long that some of the ensigns running tactical tonight hadn't been born the last time anyone doubted it would work. 2 minutes, Thorne said. His voice had the flat calm of a man who had said harder things than this before. Formation's holding. Nobody's lit up on Draxari sensors. They're not looking here, Cross said. They've never had to. Desai's tea had gone cold in its chipped mug an hour ago. Her fingers moved instead across 3 displays at once, tracking the coalition's scattered hulls as they folded into formation behind the human line. Yeru's skiffs on the flank, the Ashkir remnant ships tucked in tight. She hadn't touched it since the quiet unmarked vessels bringing up the rear like something that preferred not to be looked at directly. New Horizons still transmitting, she said, colony administrators broadcasting on an open loop. Just talking? Reading names, I think? People still on the ground. Cross didn't ask her to play it. He already knew what it would sound like, and he needed his hands steady for what came next. 1 minute, Thorne said. Holloway's fingers had gone still over the tactical glass, formations already drawn and redrawn until there was nothing left to sketch. Sir, Zorath's fleet just dropped out of transit. They're forming up over the colony. No hurry in it. Like they've done this so many times it's routine. It has been, Cross said. That's what we're here to end. The countdown reached 0 without ceremony. No cheer went up on the bridge, the same way none had gone up in the Dominion chamber hours before. Both sides, it seemed, had learned that history didn't wait for anyone's applause. The human fleet came around the shoulder of the gas giant in silence, running dark, exactly the way 47 war games had said they could. Zorath saw them appear on his tactical display and felt, for the first time in longer than he could remember, something close to surprise. Not alarm. Surprise was not fear. He filed the appearance of 80-some human ships as a curiosity, nothing more, and returned his attention to the colony below, where the final evacuation warnings were counting down on every channel his sensors could reach. Cute, he said to no one in particular. They brought a funeral escort. His second-in-command, a broad-backed officer named Kaith, didn't answer. Kaith had learned, over years of service, that Zorath's commentary rarely required a response. Then the channel opened without an invitation, Cross's voice, cutting through every frequency the Dominion fleet was using. calm in a way that made several officers on Zorath's bridge glance sideways at their commander, waiting to see how he'd take being interrupted. "This is Admiral Devon Cross, Earth Defense Command," the voice said. "You're about to receive something you weren't invited to see." A recording began to play alongside it. The Dominion chamber, the tally board, the vote. Zorath's own voice, delivering his own ultimatum, broadcast back at him through a human relay as though it were new information. 277 votes to destroy a colony that never harmed anyone, Cross said, once the recording finished. 76 who knew better and said nothing. 65 of those 76 already signed with us in secret. The other 10 are sitting on my bridge right now, watching this happen. They didn't come to fight. They came to witness. Zorath's crest flared, slow and involuntary. "You have 88 ships, Admiral. I count over 20 for every one of yours. This is not a negotiation. This is a courtesy call before an execution. We do not kneel," Cross said. "We do not forget. We do not forgive." Somewhere behind Zorath, Kaith shifted his weight, and for the first time in years of service, something in his 3 eyes looked less than certain. "You have 7 seconds to withdraw from this system," Cross said. "After that, the only thing burning at New Horizon will be the Ember Protocol, keeping its one promise. Burn one of ours, we answer 12-fold. That's not a threat, Overlord. That's the only rule we ever needed 39 years to finish writing." Zorath laughed, and it rolled across his bridge like something breaking loose. 12-fold. From 88 ships, he turned toward the tactical display, already composing the order that would end this quickly and permanently. "Kaith, target there." 7, Cross said. Zorath's mandibles clicked once, an old reflex he hadn't used since his early campaigns. 6. On the human bridge, nobody moved. Thorn's hand had drifted, without seeming to notice, to the edge of the photograph tucked in his collar. Desai's fingers hovered above the console, not yet committing to the sequence loaded, and waiting beneath them. 5. Cross reached into his coat pocket and closed his hand around the locket without opening it, just enough to feel the shape of it against his palm. Full activation. 2. 12 locations across the Dominion staging network, supply depots, relay stations. 4. Zorath gave the order anyway, certain that whatever the humans thought they had prepared, it would not matter once his fleet's full weight came to bear. 3. Thorn, Cross said, quiet enough that only the bridge crew heard it. Execute Protocol Alpha. A fuel convoy that had sat undisturbed behind 3 different moons for longer than anyone had bothered to check, went from silent to lit within the same 4-second window. 1. The countdown reached 0 on every screen at once, human and Draxari alike, and for a heartbeat, nothing happened at all. Then, far behind Zorath's overconfident formation, in a stretch of space his sensors had marked safe for longer than his current command had existed. The first proximity charge woke up after years of patient waiting and did exactly what it had been built to do. Zorath felt the flagship shudder before the alarms even caught up to it. The shudder hadn't finished traveling through the hull before the second impact hit, 8 seconds behind the first, closer to the reactor this time. Zorath's crest flared as he gripped the command rail. Around him, the bridge had gone from disciplined to something rawer. Officers who had never lost a fight in their careers now finding out what losing sounded like. Alarms stacking on alarms until the individual tones blurred into one long warning. "Multiple hits across the staging network," Kaith said, and for the first time in years of service, his voice had an edge in it that wasn't calm. "Depot 7 is gone, the convoy behind the third moon, gone. This wasn't a fleet action, Overlord. This was already inside our lines before we arrived." Zorath turned toward the tactical display, and what he saw there didn't fit anything he understood about war. 12 strikes, evenly spaced, all landing within the same breath of time, none of them from ships he could see. This is coming from somewhere else. It was coming, though neither of them could know the shape of it yet. From 47 years of patience, seeded quietly into every corridor a Draxari war fleet had ever used to resupply. "Find their fleet," he said. "Find the ships doing this. Their fleet hasn't fired a shot," Kaith said. "The human ships are still holding position, waiting for a single afternoon when someone finally said the word that woke it up." On the Bastion's bridge, Cross watched the tactical feed update in real time, 12 green markers turning red across the Dominion's staging map, one after another. The Ember Network doing exactly what it had been built to do and never once been asked to. "Thorn," he said. "Casualties on our side. None reported," Thorn said. "Not one ship's taken a hit. Desai's fingers had stopped moving across her console. She was staring at the feed instead. The way a person stares at something they'd trained for so long they'd stop believing it would ever be real. "Sir, the Draxari homeworld's picking up the broadcast. They're seeing this live." Cross didn't answer immediately. He reached into his coat pocket and let his hand rest there, against the shape of the locket, without taking it out. Not yet. There was still something ahead of this moment that hadn't happened. Something he'd promised himself he would be steady for when it came. "Let them see it," he said finally. "Every second of it." Holloway, who had gone quiet since the countdown ended, looked up from the tactical glass. "Sir, coalition ships are holding formation, but Yeru's hailing. Wants to know if her people can move in." "Tell her not yet," Cross said. "This part isn't for fighting. It's for watching." Overlord Zorath had built 289 years of certainty on a single premise, that no species facing his numbers would ever choose the fire over the Nihil. He had watched 43 species make that choice correctly. He had never once needed a contingency for the alternative. He needed one now, and he had none. "Bring the fleet about," he ordered, full offensive posture. "If they want to hide behind ambushes, we'll burn the colony regardless and let the ambushes chase smoke." Kaith relayed the order, and for a moment it looked like it might work, like sheer weight of numbers could still force the outcome Zorath had always assumed was inevitable. The Dominion fleet began to turn, dreadnoughts swinging their mass toward New Horizons' pale curve, weapons charging with a low collective hum that had, until today, always been the last sound a defiant world heard. Then the human channel opened again, and Cross's voice returned, quieter now than the countdown had been. "You're still counting ships," Cross said. "You were never going to win by counting ships. You were going to lose the moment you decided silence was surrender." Zorath said nothing. There was, for the first time in longer than he could measure, nothing convenient to say. "Ambassador Wei," Cross continued, and the channel widened, folding in a second voice, small, steady, unmistakably human, speaking from somewhere inside the Dominion chamber itself, where she had sat through the entire vote with her hands folded and said nothing at all. "You told us to kneel," Wei said. "You forgot that some species only grow stronger when you try to break them." On the Draxari bridge, Kaith's three eyes moved once toward Zorath and did not move away again. The fleet's turn slowed, then stalled entirely, as more of the staging network's wreckage lit up secondary systems across a dozen worlds Zorath hadn't thought to check. Fuel reserves, relay stations. It was the second time in an hour his expression had betrayed something other than obedience. The long, invisible tale of an empire that had never once imagined its throat could be reached from the inside. Zorath reached for the ceremonial blade at his side, a habit older than reason, a thing his hands did when his mind had nothing left to offer. He did not draw it. He only rested his claws against the hilt and watched the tactical display fill with red, one marker at a time, until the pattern of it stopped looking like a battle and started looking like an accounting. Somewhere behind him, unnoticed in the noise, Kaith quietly rerouted a secondary command channel not to obey Zorath's last order, but to hold the fleet's remaining ships in place instead of advancing further into whatever this was. It was a small thing. It was also the first order Kaith had given in his career that wasn't Zorath's. The human fleet still hadn't fired. 7 seconds, Cross said again, and his voice hadn't changed pitch at all since the first time he'd said it, hours or a lifetime ago. "You had 7 seconds to withdraw. You used them convincing yourself the numbers still mattered." Zorath's grip tightened on the blade's hilt. "They don't," Cross said. "They never did. Zorath's blade never cleared its sheath." The third strike came not from the staging network this time, but from directly ahead, a single mine planted years earlier along the exact approach vector his own tacticians had once called too obvious to guard. It punched through the flagship's forward shielding and found the bridge. For one frozen second, the recording drone still running at his shoulder caught everything. Zorath's 3 amber eyes went wide all at once, an expression his crew had never seen on him and would never see again. 289 years of certainty collapsed into a single look, the look of someone finally meeting the exception he'd always insisted couldn't exist. He had never been wrong about a species. He was wrong now. The explosion took the image with it. On every screen across the Draxari homeworld, that freeze frame kept playing, replayed, paused, replayed again, a conqueror's whole philosophy folding into fire in under 2 seconds. Cross watched the feed go dark and did not celebrate. Beside him, Thorne's hand had drifted to the photograph in his collar and stayed there. Desai had gone still at her console, tea forgotten, eyes fixed on the tactical display as the last of Zoreth's dreadnoughts either broke formation or simply stopped firing. Kaith's ship just signaled surrender, Holloway said quietly. First one. Others are following. On the Draxari side, in the wreckage of a chain of command that no longer had anyone at the top of it, Kaith gave the order himself, the first order of his life that hadn't come from someone above him, and the last one anyone would ever question. By the time the fighting stopped, most of the Dominion fleet lay dead in the dark. A portion surrendered outright. A smaller portion fled, scattering toward the edges of known space, and every one of those ships was marked, quietly, in a ledger that would carry their names for as long as anyone cared to look for them again. Cross reached into his coat and finally drew the locket out, opening it in full view of his bridge crew for the first time all night. For Ceres, he said. For all of us. He did not say anything else. He didn't need to. On the Draxari homeworld, the broadcast played on every open channel before anyone in their government could stop it, their own overlord's last look, over and over, until the people watching no longer needed anyone to explain what they were seeing. Their leadership fell within hours, not because an enemy tore it down, but because their own citizens finally understood exactly what the kneeling doctrine had cost them. In the Dominion chamber, hours later, Ambassador Wei stood again in the same 14th row where she had said nothing for so long. This time she spoke once, simply to a chamber too shaken to look away from her. "We told you the truth 39 years ago," she said. "You called it silence. It was never silence. It was the loudest thing we've ever said." She sat back down. No one voted on anything that day. Weeks later, in an archive chamber that smelled of old paper and dust, Counselor T. Varn sat alone with a recording he had already watched more times than he could count, and pressed play again anyway. The room held nothing else. No witnesses, no ceremony, just an old delegate and a screen showing the same freeze frame, over and over, as if watching it enough times might make the galaxy that came before it feel real again. Aboard the Bastion, Cross sat in his quarters with the locket warm in his palm. He opened it the way he always had, slow, careful, the photograph of his wife and daughter, still exactly where it had always been. Behind it now sat a small data chip he hadn't been carrying before. On it, one image, a burning fleet, frozen mid-collars, the moment a doctrine met the one species it had never accounted for. He closed the locket, set it on the desk beside a cup of coffee gone cold, and did not open it again that night.